Hello, I'm Stephanie, aka Literati Medium. Today, I'm going to talk about my 2022 reading goals, and I'm also going to wrap up what I read for December and what I plan on reading this month. So for my last video, which you can check out here, I talked about my reading stats for 2021. So for 2022, I want to increase my reading goal by 12 books, so an extra book a month. I feel like that's a very attainable goal for me. But I also have several other goals that I want to try to accomplish for this year. The first one is that I want to do more group reads. Regardless of what I thought of Imagica, I really enjoyed doing the book read over on the Your Brain on Books Discord. My next goal is something that I feel like I accomplished fairly well in 2021, but that I'd like to do more, and that's to read more LGBTQIA+ representative or written books, as well as books that are representative and written by POC authors. As far as genres, I would really like to read more historical fiction, science fiction, and maybe a classic or two this year. So those are my reading goals for 2022. Why don't you tell me down in the comments below what your reading goals are for this year? Now let's get into what I read in December. The first book was Know My Name by Chanel Miller. In the video that I tagged earlier, I also talked about this book, so I won't summarize it. But I did rate this book 5 stars. The next book that I read in December was The Keeper of Night by Kylie Lee Baker. So I summarized this book in my last wrap-up in the TBR section, so I won't summarize it here, but you can check out that video by clicking the link above. I actually DNF'd this book. Something about it just didn't grab my attention, and I found that to be a little bit of a shame considering I thought from the description that I was absolutely going to love this book. It talks about Shinigami, it's magical, it's fantasy, strong female heroine. Thought it was going to be a shoo-in for me, but every single time I sat down to read this book, I literally started falling asleep. I will say the writing quality was really, really good. Kylie Lee Baker has a really good lyrical prose style, and it works well in this book for certain moments. So because of that, and because I feel like this is a book I should like, I'm not going to be getting rid of this just yet. I'm going to keep it and try it at a later time. Maybe I just wasn't in the right headspace for this. So this currently sits, even though it's a DNF, at 3 stars, and we'll see what happens the next time I try to read it. The third book that I read in December was The Affinity Bridge by George Mann. Set in an alternate version of Victorian London, Sir Maurice Newberry, gentleman investigator to the crown, works to protect the Empire from her foes. When an airship crashes, he and his newly hired assistant, Miss Victoria Hobbs, are sent to investigate. There has also been a string of gruesome murders that has Scotland Yard baffled, and there's a mysterious plague going around in the slums that makes its victims crave human flesh. So I read this book because I actually picked up the third book in a charity auction. It's on my TBR shelf. So in order to read that, I had to read the first one because I'm a completionist and I have to. My first impression was that this felt very Doctor Who. And then when I looked up George Mann, I saw that George Mann is actually most known for writing Doctor Who novels. So I was like, oh, that makes sense. He's also really popular for writing New Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. And this book is essentially a cross between those two. The world building is a lot of fun. It's a very steampunk world with zombies in it. The mystery of the airship and the murders and the plague are really interesting, and not all of the answers were given in this first book. Particularly the zombie plague has not been properly explained, so to say. So I am looking forward to reading the next book. Victoria Hobbs is my favorite kind of strong female heroine because she's strong, but she's also very feminine at the same time. I think a lot of times, especially when male authors try to depict female characters, that are strong, they tend to masculinize them. And that's not what I want to see as a woman in a book. And George Mann definitely avoids that. Both Newberry and Victoria are also very likable characters. At the end of the day, though, I was just left with an overall feeling that this book was aggressively fine. And because of that, I rated it 3 stars. After that, I read the book that I was supposed to do a book versus adaptation on in December, but life just got crazy, so I didn't do it, and that was Foundation by Isaac Asimov. So I watched the TV show. I am still planning on doing a book versus adaptation, but it's turning out to be a lot more challenging than I had initially thought it was going to be. I also summarized this in my last TBR, so you can go check that out. Stay tuned this month hopefully this month, for a book versus adaptation of Foundation. At the end of the day, though, I rated this book 2 stars. So one of the reasons I was really able to read anything in December was because I was mostly listening in audiobook. This next book was one of them, and that was Reapers by Bryan Davis. The first book in the trilogy, Reapers tells the story of Phoenix, a reaper who transports the souls of the dead to the gateway so that they can travel on to their final destination. Or so he's told. So this book was my first grimdark. It's not necessarily gruesome, but the universe is just kind of unforgivingly bleak. I can honestly say that the story was truly unique and unlike anything I had read before as far as the world building was concerned. There are strong female characters. In fact, most of the characters, aside from Phoenix, are female characters. And they're diverse characters, which is nice. However, there were a few moments when he's describing one of the character, and I can remember there's this TikToker who talks about sensitivity reading and how you should never use food terms to describe someone of a different race. So like their cafe au lait skin, like don't do that. He falls into these traps a lot, and I couldn't help but think of that when I was listening to it and cringing a little bit. Also, it tends to fall a little bit into a harem story where literally every female character wants Phoenix in some way, shape, or form. And that's not truly feminist. It's a male author trying to be feminist and failing. That being said, I will give him a few points for trying. The other thing I wasn't crazy about with this book is that I found it really confusing, the age of Phoenix, and that comes into play because Grim Reapers are Grim Reapers for like a certain amount of time and then they're released. And just like I was doing the math as different things came up in the story, and I was like, this guy can't be more than 16, just based on the context I've been given of this world. And so in that way, I feel like the narrator was a poor choice because he definitely sounded like a 35 plus man. Overall, I rated this book 2 stars. While I am intrigued to see what happens next, I'm not really intrigued enough to finish reading. The 6th book that I read in December was actually an advanced reader copy of the audiobook that I got off of NetGalley, and that was Gemma and Josh Make a Baby by Sarah Reedy. Gemma Jacobs is a 30-something career woman who works for a famous self-help guru. After a divorce and an infertility diagnosis, Gemma decides that she doesn't need a partner, she needs a baby. She's given some hope when her doctor tells her that she should be able to conceive with IVF. So she reaches out to her perfect sperm donor, who just happens to be her brother's best friend. To her surprise, Josh agrees. I will admit, I feel a little bit called out by this book as a 30-something career woman with no partner and who has been going through some medical things. That means that I may never be able to have children of my own. However, I loved this book. I actually listened to it in one day, which I have never done before. The characters are really likable, and I appreciated that it shines some light on female fertility issues that you don't normally see in books, especially not in romance. I can also honestly say that while the plot is a little bit ridiculous, it's driven by the characters' choices and their internal conflicts, so therefore it feels really genuine. So I rated this book 5 stars. I believe it comes out in just a few weeks, so you should definitely check it out if you enjoy romance and this is a trope that you don't mind. The final book that I read in December was Fighting Words by Kimberly Brubaker Bradley. Della has always had her older sister Suki, even after their mom went to prison. When their mom's boyfriend does something so terrible that they have to run away fast, they get put into foster care. With the immediate danger gone, Suki's mental health collapses, and Della realizes that maybe she's been too reliant on Suki. So this is a middle grade book, and it's amazing. I personally would highly recommend the audiobook because the narrator is fantastic. It is a really hard read, but Della is such a fantastic character and has such a strong voice that it just pulls you in and keeps you wanting to read more. The themes of love and trauma are so well developed that you can tell, unfortunately, that Kimberly's writing from at least some portion of personal experience, and she covers that in her afterword after the story. If you have a middle grade reader that you think could handle the dark themes of this story, please have them read this. It goes over really important topics like consent and how to deal with conflict in a way that doesn't delve too deep into the darker details. So I rated this book 5 stars. I just have to say, I read 3 5-star books in 1 month. I'd say that's an excellent reading month and was definitely a great way to wrap up 2021. If you are interested in reading any of the books that I rated 3 stars or above, I do have the affiliate links down in the description box below. And before we get into the TBR, please, of course, like, comment, and subscribe. Alright, so the first book on my TBR was actually on my TBR last month, and that was Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. So this was my tarot card TBR book for the month, and unfortunately I didn't get to read it as I was physically reading it, and I just didn't have a lot of time for physical reading in December. That being said, I am about 60% of the way through, and I'm loving it so far. I'm hoping to finish it this month. It is a buddy read with a friend. However, you'll notice with the rest of my TBR that it's pretty ambitious, so I hope to read more in it, but I'm not sure if I'll be able to finish it this month. But it's on my TBR. The next 2 books on my TBR I will say together, and that is The Eye of the World and The Great Hunt by Robert Jordan. When a town is attacked by Trollocs, a monstrous race that seems to be a cross between the Uruk-hai and the Minotaur, at least in the TV show, 5 villagers flee into a world of untold dangers as they find their fates. You may guess, this is the reason why my TBR for this month is rather ambitious, because these are some chunky books, and I'm planning on doing a book versus adaptation to Wheel of Time for these 2 books. I have already watched the first season. I enjoyed it. I didn't love it. So stay tuned for that book versus adaptation as well. And the last book on my TBR is A Flicker in the Dark by Stacey Willingham. 20 years after her father's arrest, Chloe is a successful psychologist who is preparing for her wedding. When one girl and then another vanishes, Chloe will question herself as she sees parallels between these 2 cases and her father's MO. So I read a few thrillers in 2021, but I haven't read a serial killer thriller yet, and I'm kind of weirdly excited. I'm not sure what that says about me though. And there you have it. I covered a lot in this video: my reading goals, my wrap-up, and my TBR. Please check out my website, literatimedium.com, for all of my bookish content. Let's see what stories tomorrow brings.